Hi again, it's Mr. Skelton, and in this video I'm going to be discussing the 5 most common mistakes that students make when they're first learning the instrument. And these tend to be things that become bad habits. They're not things that are necessarily really easy to fix right in the beginning. They're things that take a lot of attention as you're first learning the instrument, and you're really eager to learn all those songs, and I understand that. But we can't let these things go and then hope to fix them later, because by that point you'll be so used to doing things in an incorrect, or if not incorrect, at least a way that is not going to make you play as well. That you'll be so used to that that you just won't be able to fix it later. So we really have to look at getting these fixed from the very beginning. The first thing has to do with getting the instrument in the proper spot on your shoulder. Now, there's a reason why white belt is all about that, having it on your shoulder, having your left hand free to be able to touch, scroll and shoulders, bridge and nose, right? Because we have to have it in that spot that lets us hold it with the weight of our head and have the rest of our body relatively free and flexible to do other things. And there's a lot of technical skills that we learn later that this really affects, but the one that you're going to encounter the soonest is just being able to move the bow properly back and forth. So, because when we do out, up, and on, it's up here on my shoulder and just enough. Now we all have that, and I use the term sweet spot. We all have that spot where the weight of our head is just enough to push down on it and hold it in place. We sometimes see it. Some students will not have enough of their head on, and the instrument tends to drop a little bit. Sometimes it comes in front a little bit, and then even though this is called a chin rest, we don't usually use much of our chin on it, especially if our head is going forward. If I turn my head, yeah, then maybe, but most of the time I'm using the side of my jaw. So we want to try and keep it just up here. If I'm looking straight, it's basically underneath my left ear, and then I can turn my head a little bit. If I have difficulty seeing what's in front of me, let's say I'm looking at my book and I'm trying to see what's there, I can turn my whole body, and even my chair if it's more convenient to do that, so that I can point in the correct direction. But we don't want to bring the instrument itself in this direction, because it actually is much less comfortable. I know sometimes I get a little disagreement, like, no, it's really much more comfortable for me to do it this way. Not really, because then you have to push down, and it creates tension, and we don't want that. So that's the first thing. The second problem has to do with what your left hand shape is. And this usually comes in about orange belt or so, because after we have it up here and we suddenly have to use our fingers on the strings, then our wrist comes up. This is a really, really common but very, very bad habit. And let me just, so you can see my arm a little bit better. The shape of your hand has to be very curved. You want the wrist to be not like far away like this, but just kind of hanging down as much as possible. If it's coming up, you can't really play a tune very well. And it's also hard to push the strings down, because the muscles in your hand work best if they come straight down like this rather than like this. So if my wrist is up, I'm having to close my hand like this, which is a lot harder than if I'm trying to grab something like this. So having your wrist down lets your fingers get where they need to go, and you'll play the tune a lot better. The other thing about your hand shape is your hand is not at a right angle, right? We call that perpendicular. It's not at a right angle to the neck of the instrument. It's actually turned a little bit. And what you want to try and do is try to bring your arm around a little bit as well, so that your fingers don't have to do all the work. One other common problem with the left hand is where the thumb goes. It's just right at the very, very end of the fingerboard, slightly underneath. It could be up a little bit, but it tends to be easier to get some of those higher notes to reach more the more it's underneath. We want to have a little space in here in between the neck. So when I say underneath, I'm not talking about like where it's just sort of lying down like that. We don't want that. We've got to have a little bit of room in there. But this is our reference point for keeping it in the right spot. The next thing has to do with, again, just with left hand, is something called intonation, and that's your ability to play in tune. And I was talking about that before, about the shape of your hand being able to allow you to do that, to reach to the proper tape. If you have the tapes on, later on when you don't have tapes, you got to still find that spot. And here's the important thing to know about that is it's not which finger you use, although I do want you to use the third finger on the blue and the first finger on the red to build sort of a common way of doing it. You can't keep using the same finger on different notes. It doesn't really work that well. But it's actually where the finger is that matters most. So if you see a note that's blue, let's say for orange belt, green belt, anything above that, seeing that, oh, well, that's my third finger, I'll just put that third finger down. If it's not where the blue tape is, it's probably not going to sound right. Now, I say the probably because even the tapes are just guides. They might not be absolutely perfect either. We always have to listen to how things sound as well. So the tapes are guides, but in more cases than not, reaching up to them is usually going to be the most common problem. Now, putting that aside for a moment, the next thing is to do with the bow. Right? Those are all things about the instrument side of business here. Bow hold is a really tricky thing to get. I have another video about that as well, but I can't stress it enough. And one thing I didn't put in the other video that might be very useful to you, I did use it in lessons earlier on, so I just want to repeat it so you can see it. There are lots of different ways to get the proper bow hold. And there are different variations for what a proper bow hold looks like and that kind of thing. I'm using what I have observed to be the most common one, the one that most professionals use. If they use it, chances are there's a reason for it, so we try to copy that as much as possible. So I like to think of this in 3 steps. The first is obviously the easiest way to hold a bow would be if we could just hold it like that, right? So we just say, hold it. Now, we can't really play well this way because it keeps our wrist from being able to bend very well. Our wrist is locked, and it makes us do too much work with the arm instead, when really, it'd be nicer to use more of the hand, to bow. So the second step is to relax it. So if I'm holding it here, if I just kind of relax it, just pull it off just a little bit. Just relax it just a little bit. Grip and relax. Grip and relax. And I'm going to relax it enough so that my thumb comes up and just touches underneath the stick. I don't know if you can see that in between my first 2 fingers here. Watch my thumb. Here's my grip and relax. So you see it over here? It's just touching underneath the stick here. Grip, relax. And then the last step for violin and viola players, if you're a cello player, you'd be done. But if you're violin and viola players, we have to tilt it. We have to tilt it towards the long part of the bow. And that's to bring the pinky up on top. And that's how you know if you've done it enough. Right? So grip, relax, tilt. Right? Lean it on over. Reason for that is that turns our wrist in the direction that the bow is going to go. So now we have one more thing that we can use to control it. So I'll show you one more time. Grip, relax so that the thumb comes up on the underside there, and then tilt so that the pinky comes right up on top. I don't have to think about it any other way than that. If you find other ways to get the same kind of bow hold, and it looks roughly the same, hey, all power to you. Like I said, it's just a way of remembering that. The nice thing about doing it this way is there are times when you have to hold your bow this way. Let's say if you're going to do pizzicato, and then you suddenly have to go to play with your bow, and then you got to go back to pizzicato again, and it's being able to go back and forth between the two is a skill we have to get as well. So it's a very useful way. The final thing to do, or the final mistake that's often made, has to do with how we move our arm in order to keep our bow straight. The straightness of the bow going across the strings, and I've mentioned this in previous videos as well, going again at a right angle across the strings is really important. As close to being straight across as possible. It's hard to do in the video. Everything is going backwards on me, so I'm a little bit disoriented by that. So I apologize for that. In order to maintain that straightness over the whole length of the bow, remember I had the thing with the rosin, right? When you practice that, we have to remember that it's not our whole arm that moves, right? We're not doing Popeye here, right? We actually just bend at the elbow, and watch my wrists, huh? So they kind of work opposite each other, and that would be the fifth area. So that's what allows me to play with a much better sound than if I was doing, right, or something possibly even worse. So let me just recap those five things. And the first is instrument position, getting up on your shoulder as much under your ear as possible. You do want to end up having your head on the shoulder rest. You don't want it over here. You do want it on the shoulder rest. And that's, again, it works better that way. They wouldn't have put it on that side if that weren't true. The second is your left hand shape, keeping the wrist down and your hand kind of turned a little bit. Think of it as if your pinky has to reach all the way across there. Maybe we'll do some exercises like that in lessons. The third thing is intonation, making sure that we are reaching for the correct tape, right? Getting the third finger all the way up to the blue. That's usually a problem. And not just simply, oh, I'm just going to move my hand up and do that, because then I can't get my first finger on the red, right? We've got to sort of spread those fingers apart a little bit more than might normally be comfortable. The second thing was the bow hold, or I'm sorry, the fourth thing was the bow hold. That was the grip, relax, tilt. Okay. And then the last thing was about moving my bow straight across the string, as much at a right angle as I can possibly do. And that is all about keeping this from going backwards. Right? I don't bow with my elbow. If anything, I'm bowing with my wrist, pushing my hand out and bringing that back. All right, so I hope those five things help you, and you'll be hearing me nag you a lot in lessons. So sooner that you are making them second nature, the better. All right, thank you.